It's important that Colonial Williamsburg preserve this trade because there's not a lot of other places out there doing hand engraving anymore.
The 18th century engraver is producing sort of an add-on to a product that's already made. So it might be an object that was purchased somewhere else, made by a jeweler, made by a silversmith, maybe a founder. But those objects then might want to have personalization on them. So adding a monogram, names and dates, making it commemorative, maybe a memorialization, or to, maybe a wedding date or celebrate a birth. The purchaser of engraving really could be just about anyone. We are seeing a broad spectrum from the really wealthy, which of course we kind of expect to see on high-end silver or pieces of jewelry.
The materials an engraver would be working with in 18th century Williamsburg are silver and pewter primarily. They'd also be doing a lot of copper if they're requested to do any kind of printing plates. Brass and bronze for instrumentation, really any metal that's not steel. If you needed steel engraved, that would actually be the gunsmiths. The tools themselves, the engravers, are steel, so as long as they're sharp, hand pressure is going to push that right through. Engravers in the 18th century learned their trade through apprenticeship, just like any other trade. So you would start around 12 or 14 years old, serve 7 years as an apprentice learning the skills for room and board and basic education to go along with that. A lot of drawing early on, and then learning to cut straight lines, learning to cut curves, and just getting more familiar with different materials and different shapes.
You're going to have good eye-hand coordination, good eyesight, and a lot of patience. Trickiest part with engraving is you're going to have to sit still. But we might be called to do designing of monograms, names and dates on things, but we're often having to mimic other people's artwork. You might have something engraved by another engraver and want to match that piece up, and we're going to have to be able to copy that. In Williamsburg here, we don't think there was a lot of engravers. There might have been maybe about 4 overall, maybe around the 100-year stretch. The time we show most is in the late 1770s. So William Waddell would have been in this shop here. He comes in the late 18th century, but he's in Williamsburg for some time. He's a relative of the Getty family whose home is right next door to us, so we know there's some partnership with them. James Craig, who's on the other end of town, does advertise the services of engraving, so not a high demand, but we're definitely seeing their presence.
It's important that Colonial Williamsburg preserve this trade because there's not a lot of other places out there doing hand engraving anymore. You've got us here, you've got the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in DC. All of our paper money is still hand cut, the way that we cut the copper plates here. Other than that, you might find a jeweler here and there. It's becoming a much smaller field as machines make engraving more affordable and faster for the average person who doesn't really see the difference between the two because they don't have examples to compare.
Looking at engraving to understand the life of the 18th century person can be a little bit tricky. It can give us a great name and date to something. It can tell us an event that might have happened, but engraving can be put on at any time. So the objects that might be brought to us might not be engraved until much, much later. So that is one of those tricky parts for the historian side of what we do is how do we date it from that engraving if we don't know exactly when it was engraved.